Over the last several weeks, we've been talking about what it means to be a party starter. But isn't it true that when it comes to a party, who you're really with is what matters? I have a 3-year-old daughter, and we have a lot of conversations. But if we're honest, I have to explain a lot. But sometimes my daughter will think she knows what's up. She'll have the whole day planned out in her head. She'll tell me it's time to go to grandma's house when it's actually time to go to school. I will try to explain to her or ask her, "Are you sure?" But there's no changing her mind. She will argue all the way to the front door of the school. See, sometimes we feel like we can't ask questions or change our minds or say, "I'm not sure." So we answer, we argue, we come off like we know it all, even though we don't. And eventually, we become the exact opposite of a party starter. We defend that position at all costs. And while we do, we tune out any other voices that tell us anything other than what we think. And then we even bring it into our faith. We assume that being a Christian means being people who know, assume, and defend what we believe. What we talk about today might be a huge relief for some of you who felt like you have all the answers. To help us out here, we're going to look at something written down by a guy named Luke. In this passage we're going to look at today, Jesus is with his parents, and they're traveling to Jerusalem for the Passover holiday. No matter where they lived, it was a part of their custom to return to Jerusalem for this remembrance of the way God spared the lives of the Jewish people hundreds of years before. And as it turned out, this trip became kind of a disaster, because on the way home, Mary and Joseph, Jesus' parents, looked around to realize that Jesus was nowhere to be found. They started looking everywhere frantically and eventually headed back to the temple. Luke tells us that their conversation went like this. His parents didn't know what to think. "Son," his mother said to him, "why have you done this to us? Your father and I have been frantic, searching for you everywhere." "But why did you need to search?" Jesus asked. "Didn't you know that I must be in my Father's house?" But they didn't understand what he meant. So they left Jerusalem from there and headed back to Nazareth. And then Luke writes this: Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and favor with God and all the people. Jesus was spending his time trying to learn. This is so amazing because honestly, Jesus didn't have to listen to these guys to learn. If anybody has the right to know, assume, and defend their position as the correct one, it's Jesus. We can follow Jesus' example by being a party starter that knows that there's always something to learn from others. What's cool is that Jesus continued to set this example for us through his whole life and ministry. Years later, in Jesus' most famous sermon he ever gave, he was teaching his disciples, and the crowds gathered about what it means to live a full life that God promises. And in it, he says this: "Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock on the door and it will be opened. For everyone who asks receives. The one who seeks finds. And the one who knocks, the door will be opened." It's important to note that just before this, Jesus was talking about humility. He was encouraging his followers to stop judging and to take on more humility than arrogance. This tells us that Jesus told them to ask, seek, and knock. So it could be that Jesus is telling us to do the exact same thing. We ask for humility. We seek answers through curiosity and questions. We knock, looking for wisdom. And when we find it, we receive it. So that's what I want to challenge you to do this week. Instead of what we would typically do, know, assume, and defend our stance in what we think we know, let's try something different. Let us try asking people questions. Let us try seeking knowledge from others. And let us try knocking on the door of wisdom. What if we stopped living and behaving like we have it all figured out? What if instead we got comfortable asking questions? Questions like, what can I learn from you about this? Questions like, what can I do differently because I don't know everything? What might I be getting wrong? What am I curious to know more about? Where do I need to ask, seek, and knock to find wisdom? Because here's the thing. Admitting that we don't know everything is not a sign of weakness, no matter what the world tells us. It's a sign that we are in touch with reality, because if Jesus spent time learning, growing, and asking questions, we should too. We should find the wise people in our lives to learn from, to listen to, and to grow in our faith. That's what a party starter knows. That there is more to know and people to learn from. That the more curious we are, the more adventure meeting new people we find. That it's never a party with people who think that they know it all. The party is with people who know that there's always more to learn, and there's always more people to learn from. This party could use less know-it-alls and more question askers. In other words, the party could use more people like Jesus, because a party starter knows that there is always something to learn from others. And the sooner we begin living like we have something to learn, the sooner the world begins to look more like that party that Jesus imagined.